Hello, good morning, good evening, good day, good afternoon, and aloha. Happy Friday. Welcome back to another episode of the Unidentified Celebrity Review, your home for credible news, reviews, and commentary on everything UAP, UFO, science, emerging tech, and futurism. I nailed it finally. Today's show, want to say thank you before we get started to DOS Tapes. They provide all of the tunes that you hear on the show. So please check out their SoundCloud link in the description below. Want to say welcome to all of the folks watching on YouTube and welcome to all of you out there in KGRA land. We're here every Friday at 1 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. Don't forget to keep this show on. Don't change the dial. We've got That UFO Podcast with Dan Zetterstrom and Annie McGrillen. What are they? The Other Show is what they call it. So can't wait to see what the boys are bringing for the next episode. But before we get there, of course, we've got an amazing show for you here today. Without further ado, before I bring them on, let's go ahead and pay some bills. I want to remind you, we've got a podcast that's available right after the show, not only on KGRDB, but on Spotify, iTunes. Make sure to leave us a rate and review. It goes a very long way to make sure the show keeps growing at the rate that it is. It's amazing to watch, and I would love for you guys to be a part of it. Of course, we've got Patreon if you'd like to support us there. And we've got super chats are open. We are a public access channel. We're supported by viewers like you. So if you want to support in that way and you can, please do. Of course, remember, like, subscribe, share the show, whether you're on KGRA or the Unidentified Celebrity Review YouTube channel. And don't forget to check out everybody's links are down below. So if you like our speakers, if you like our co-hosts, go check out their links below. You can find all of their stuff with the links there. So without further ado, let's go ahead and bring on our co-hosts for the day, Mr. Michael Mataluni and Mr. Ratherby Squidding. And then we've got our special co-host for the day, Mr. Peter Robbins. How are you gentlemen doing today?
Fantastic.
Good.
Great to be here.
Doing great.
It is fun. I'm so happy. We've got a really, really fun show today. Full disclosure, we double booked this show. We originally had Peter that was supposed to be here a full 2 hours. And I was like, Peter, I did it to you again. We got Avi Loeb on the same day that you're supposed to be on the show. So I was like, you know what? Instead of pushing Peter back to a different date, I thought, let's keep Peter here. This could be really cool because we've got, both of the best sides here. We've got the science side and we've got the, what would you call
Research?
it, Peter? Research. Well, I mean, I don't want to say woo because some people find that offensive. I personally don't. I love the term woo, but what would you say? What would you call it, Peter?
What's the word you're looking for?
Woo. I mean, how
Is there a less offensive term than woo?
We've got Avi Loeb with the hardcore Harvard science, and then we got Peter Robbins, researcher, speaker, talker, gentleman who's really been looking into this topic for as long as anyone really has been doing it.
For as long as there have been UFOs.
For as long as there have been UFOs. There you go. All right. Well, we only have an hour. I was going to play a prank on Avi and say, well, welcome for the whole 2 hour show. I'm sure he would have stuck around. He's a very busy man. He's making the rounds, raising money, doing the thing that science should be doing. But he's actually now got some skin in the game and is really moving the scientific discussion forward on the topic of UAP. So without further ado, Harvard professor, friend of the show, friend of all of us out there. We love hearing this gentleman, Mr. Avi Loeb. Hello, Avi. How are you?
Great to see you all.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you back. I know we've got a pretty wild weekend ahead for you. I know on later this weekend, you're going to be having a discussion with Christopher Mellon and Lou Elizondo in the same, not room, but, digital space. So we're looking forward to that conversation. If you guys don't know, that's Max Moskovich's channel. If you don't know who he is, shame on you. Go check his channel out. He gets the best interviews and he somehow wrangles these. I don't know how he does it. I told when I heard he booked the three of you guys for one thing, I was like, can you start booking our shows? Because you're amazing.
You have to understand that they are both members of the Galileo project. And
right.
They are research affiliates. But actually, I should tell you that my day was not boring so far. I mean, I had a team from Norway that showed up on the porch of my home and interviewed me for an hour and a half. And we had the Galileo team meetings today, 2 of them. Each of them lasted about an hour and a half. So it was a busy day.
I can't imagine a day that is not busy for Avi Loeb. What were you going to say, rather?
Well, yeah, are all the research associates in those meetings, or how big are those Galileo meetings at this point?
Not all, but for example, today we had about 53 people that joined us. Altogether, we have about 100 scientists, which is quite remarkable given that the project started only 4 months ago. And I should say, I got thousands of emails from people that are supportive and offered help. And the most unusual experience I had was last week. I participated in the Ignatius Forum in the Washington National Cathedral, along with Bill Nelson, the head of NASA, Avril Haines, the director of national intelligence, Jeff Bezos from Blue Origin and Amazon, and David Wilkinson, who is a theologian from Durham University. And at the end, when it ended, I mean, I can tell you some more about it, but when it was over...
Oh, we all watched it, Avi.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Glued to the screen.
Okay, so I'll tell you something you haven't seen, which is at the end, when it all ended, all the speakers left the auditorium, and there was a line of more than 50 people that wanted to speak with me, and they stood very patiently, and I spoke with each and every one of them. And the message that came repeating itself is that, people are really excited about the Galileo project, and they came all the way from New York City, from New Jersey, from Florida, from Boston, to just tell me that. And that was heartwarming. This was the first time I went out of the Boston area to a public event. And when I left the taxi in order to enter the cathedral, as soon as I opened the door of the taxi, someone said, "Are you Avi Loeb?" To me, that was quite unusual because nobody would recognize me a year ago. I bet.
Well, pretty soon you're going to have your own television show this fall on CBS. But here's
let me repeat what I said to my publicist from England. When my book came out and it did quite well, the publicist said, "Good job, Avi. You're selling the book quite well, speaking on all these podcasts." And I told him, "No, I'm not trying to sell the book. I'm just trying to convey a message. And if the public didn't like my message, the book wouldn't sell very well, but I wouldn't change my message. I don't really care how many likes I get on Twitter and how much the public appreciates the message. I'm just conveying what seems right to me."
Wait a second. I thought you don't have a Twitter handle.
I don't.
Galileo project does.
Just making sure. But I'll be honest, the funniest part of that whole cathedral conference or presentation was I loved how you slipped in, and we're still looking for funding. You're out there trying to raise the dollars, and I appreciate it.
But you have to understand, I do that because the goal is important to me, and what I would like to do is accomplish a comprehensive research program on the nature of unidentified aerial phenomena, and at the same time on objects like Oumuamua that enter the solar system from outside. And I should say, when I sat in the audience, I sat next to the director of national intelligence, Avril Haines, and it was really funny. Something you haven't seen is on stage, Jeff Bezos was saying that he was inspired by watching Star Trek at a young age, and that's why William Shatner was invited to fly on one of his vehicles. And I told Avril, who sat next to me, I said, I never liked the Star Trek. I don't like science fiction because the storyline makes no sense. It violates the laws of physics. And she said, I actually was also inspired by Star Trek, and we have to work on you. So that's the other thing that makes me a little different. But it's true. What drives me is accomplishing the science involved, so that we can clear up the fog shed a better light on these objects that we don't fully understand. And the one thing that motivates me since I was a kid, sitting in the dinner table and asking a difficult question, the adults in the room would basically pretend they know the answer, or in the worst case, they would actually dismiss the question. And that's what bothers me about this subject as well, because I feel like I'm the kid in this Danish folk tale that said the emperor has no clothes. And in this case, what I mean by the emperor is this approach of the mainstream in the academic community towards this subject, basically ignoring it, ridiculing it. And that is mentioned actually in the ODNI report to Congress on the 25th of June, the fact that this subject was stigmatized. And I think it's about time for scientists to get engaged, and we have more than 100 of them on the Galileo team.
Well, let's get into the meat of this real quick. Witness citizen Sean Ross, who you just did an interview with a couple days ago, which was amazing, says congrats on the Amazon's top seller. And then Eventide is just saying Avi is the man. So thank you guys so much for the donations. Really appreciate it. So yeah, let's dive into it, because the last time we spoke, we were talking about, you don't want government help. You don't want government intervention. We don't want government dollars, because you want to be able to release the information, share it with the public without any stipulations. And that was awesome. And then we hear of an announcement that you're joining forces with Christopher Mellon and Lou Elizondo, who we love on the show. We know behind the scenes, especially when it comes to the Gillibrand Amendment, have done amazing work that nobody sees, and they're carrying the torch on this without wanting the credit. And it's very similar to you. You're not looking for fame. You're looking to move the conversation forward scientifically and from a government. Well, not you specifically, but for them to, they're trying to get it seriously taken from a legislative perspective. So explain to us, how did this happen? Why do you think it's a good idea? And do you think it muddies the waters as far as government intervention into the project? Because Christopher Mellon is definitely still very close tied with people in our government agencies. And Lou Elizondo is a contractor for the government. So go for it. What do you say to that?
Well, it's an excellent question, and so there are two parts to the question. One has to do with data, okay, and the Galileo project will focus on open data that it assembles with its own instruments. So we are not interested in any classified data in the research program of the Galileo project. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not allowed to shake the hand of someone that knows something about classified data. That I will not ask for any access to that data, and this person would not violate any vow that he made to the government of not releasing that information. So everything is fine. We can talk about other things, like, for example, the data that we collect with the Galileo telescopes. Okay, so the reason I brought in both Lou and Chris under the tent of the Galileo project is a different one. And it was not to get any access to classified information. And that goes to the second part of my answer. It's because I believe in evidence guiding us. Okay, as a scientist, I don't care about prejudice. I don't care about what people believe in to start with. So both Chris and Lou are advocates for this cause of, these were unusual objects. We have some information that we cannot really release. And they are advocates for looking further into the classified data that the government owns. But at the same time, I also allowed under the tent skeptics. One of them is Michael Shermer, and another one is Seth Shostak. Yeah. And so just to give you an anecdote from the end of a research team meeting today, Michael Shermer presented the statistical considerations about, if we identify something unusual, how to interpret the statistics, okay? And at the end, I said it to him, I said, hopefully we'll get good enough data, good enough evidence that we will not need the statistics because it will be clear. And I said to him, if that happens, I would like you to change the name of your magazine from Skeptic to Believer. The other thing, so my view in general is that given, if indeed data guides us, if indeed evidence will be beyond a reasonable doubt, then it doesn't really matter what people's opinions are to start with. And that's why you need to bring everyone under the tent. It's not a political discussion, right? It's not a philosophical discussion.
Yeah.
If there is the goal that unites everyone under the Galileo umbrella is let's collect new and high quality data such that we will figure out what the answer is. And if we are all united by this goal, then there is nothing to worry about people having different opinions to start with. And that's the beauty of science. You see, if I cannot convince with the data skeptics, then the data is not good enough. Right. So it doesn't really matter whether they are in the tent or outside the tent. The data is simply not good. But if the data is good enough, then I don't care what they started from. Right. So now coming back to the Gillibrand amendment, I'm very supportive of that. And as you know, the director of the Galileo project is given the privilege of selecting 3 members of the advisory committee that is mentioned in the amendment. And that's, I find that as a great privilege, if indeed it will be approved by the Senate and Congress, because that's a similar privilege to the NASA administrator that is selecting 3 members, and the president of the National Academies of Sciences selects 2, and the president of the National Academy of Engineering selects 2. So,
we get 3, right? The Galileo project gets 3.
Yeah, we get 3. So we are in a good company, and now the question is, who will be these members? That's something for me to think about if it gets approved. And the point is, whoever serves on that committee, who gets exposed to classified information, will not, will not transmit that information to the research program of the Galileo project. We are completely divorced from that in our research agenda. We are interested in open data that we assemble ourselves. But at the same time, if that amendment leads to better analysis of classified data, of a better coordination within the government, better transparency about this matter altogether, it's complementary to what the Galileo project is doing. And I'm very much in favor of that.
Peter, you had a question?
Yeah, 2 things. And Avi, wonderful meeting you. When you're speaking before, I was thinking of the youngest child at the Seder that asked the questions that other people can't ask. But people like Shermer and Shostak, they masquerade as skeptics. The fact is, we all not only need to be skeptics, but we have to be the best skeptics, because if we associate ourselves with alleged information or material that really does not bear up under scientific scrutiny, it hurts the whole field. They are debunkers. And for me, it can be reduced to a mantra. For them, it can't be, therefore it isn't, therefore it must be something else. And it's my job to pat you on the head and give you a pseudo-scientific explanation based on either my own rejection of the idea or my own anxiety in dealing with it. That said, I'm very curious. Was there a time when you were younger when you thought that there really was not much to this possibility of truly anomalous UFO phenomena from points unknown under intelligent control with advanced technology? And what was it that brought you into that realm of understanding that this is very real and that there is this tremendous pre-existing bias in the world of academia and official science, so to say, that needed to be addressed?
Right. So I was completely agnostic on this issue because I didn't study it before. But what brought me into it was the discovery of this first interstellar object that came into the solar system and found near Earth called Oumuamua back in 2017. And at first, just like everyone else, I thought maybe it's a rock. But the problem was that, first of all, we didn't expect a rock from another star based on calculations that I've done a decade earlier. There aren't enough rocks to explain this detection. But moreover, the properties of this object were quite unusual, quite weird. And I, coming from other areas of astronomy and cosmology, I'm used to the situation where if you see something that doesn't quite line up with what you expect, you start to raise possibilities. And to me, it sounded completely legitimate to come up with the hypothesis that this object is artificial, simply because it had so many anomalies that could not be explained otherwise. And I rest my case now, because all 4 possibilities that were suggested by other astronomers to explain it from a natural origin, all of them invoke something that we've never seen before. And so I keep arguing that it's just like a caveman that meets a cell phone and is used to playing with rocks all of his life. He would argue the cell phone is a rock of a type that I've never seen before. That's the natural thing. But of course, the best way to convince yourself is to get more data. And my point is, irrespective if someone is a debunker, the point is, if I show that someone an image, high resolution, a megapixel image that shows an object with bolts and screws, or maybe even a label saying made on exoplanet Y, okay, if I show that and fill the lines, the possibility of an extraterrestrial technological origin, then, I think that person would not be regarded seriously. It's just like in the court. If you have good enough evidence, the verdict is obvious. And that's the goal of the Galileo project, to get sufficiently high quality data such that nobody would be able to refute it.
Real quick, Avi, you mentioned this, and just to go back to Elizondo, real quick, you mentioned when we first talked to you on the Singularity Lab about this, that you weren't going to look at classified data, but you were willing to talk to people who could point you in the right direction. It seems that Elizondo and Mellon might be some of those people that can point you in a direction to look. Is that and I know we read on the actual Galileo Project website that this is going to be their role. Is this something that's been, are you focused on this now, or is this coming later? Like, to what degree are they guiding you on where to point the telescopes now?
Our super chat question also is kind of asking the same thing. Like, will Lou and Chris not be able to tell you where to put the sensors, but Avi, could they tell you a lot of where not to put them?
Right. Well, it's too preliminary at this point, because we just started purchasing instruments that we will put together in the coming months on the roof of the Center for Astrophysics on the Harvard University campus. So we are still not at the point where we have an operating telescope system that we can deploy at various locations. But indeed, there are 2 ways by which people with a knowledge base of Lou and Chris can contribute. One is in terms of guiding us as to where might be good locations. Another is societal implications. If we do detect something, what would be the implications for society? What would be the protocol? How do we deal with such information? At the moment, there is very limited discussion on this subject. And I actually wrote an essay in Medium on this issue of lack of protocol. Right now, my view is, if we do detect equipment that seems to be extraterrestrial, the first thing to do is collect as much information about what its intent might be, what kind of information is it trying to collect, and how does it respond to what we do in a passive way, not engaging with it. And then, of course, we'll have to go into a very detailed discussion as to what to do about it.
I think, but that second point you made, I think you hit on something very big. And I think this is why, I've heard pushback about Elizondo and Mellon being on the Galileo project in an advisement role, because their concern is if you're doing this separate from the government and then Lou and Melon are helping to disseminate this information or helping you to decide how to disseminate the information, that then it's going to be wrapped up in a sort of governmental disclosure. That's the fear.
So no, they will not be involved. I mean, they're not scientists. You have to understand. So we have a team of scientists that will analyze the data, and in the standard scientific way, the data will be open. The analysis will be transparent. We will write scientific papers and submit them to scientific journals. And that is not something that either Lou or Chris have expertise in. They are not scientists. So the way that the data is analyzed or released is not in their jurisdiction. We see.
That's good to know.
Yeah, we see the contribution of people that are not scientists as a contribution to the bigger picture of what the implications of something, and also, in terms of the knowledge base about the history of events and so forth, which locations might be good for us to look at and things like that. And it's sort of more in a general context.
Well, here's kind of a hypothetical for you. What if, Lou and Melon kind of tell you to look at a specific area, and it turns out the reason for that is because the government is trying to kind of do a test and see if they can pass off their tech as extraterrestrial, and they're kind of using you to do that. If you did that and found that it was military tech, how would you address that? Would you release that data?
I should say, first of all, scientists are smart. Okay, so
fair enough.
If someone tries to fool us, we might actually figure it out pretty quickly.
Would you tell us though that they were trying to fool you?
We are okay. So here is the advantage of being a scientist. You don't need to pretend. You can you're not a politician. You can be sincere, honest, straightforward. The way I try to deliberate, and in a way, you don't have to do calculations. It's not politics where you have to convince a large crowd that they would vote for you. That's not the goal here. The goal is to speak the truth and figure out what reality is like. And most of the sky is not classified. And we hope to get, a lot of telescope systems, hundreds of, it all depends on the funding. That's why I'm trying to convince, people that have the wealth to help us, because it's really crucial for us to have hundreds of telescope systems such that, we can cover enough of the sky. And then, I had two reports about the event, the forum that took place at the Washington National Cathedral. And it was interesting for me because I was in the company of two reverends when I spoke. And, the intersection between spirituality, religion, and extraterrestrial life is quite interesting because if you think about it, Jeff Bezos spoke before me, and he was talking about business plans of bringing millions of people to space. And there is no business plan that you can think of leaving the solar system. You cannot make money out of that. And the only reason to do that would be spiritual. And so if you think about what might visit us, it's not about business.
That's fair. That's an interesting viewpoint. Yeah. What do you got, Peter?
Yeah. The level of ridicule that has caused so many in the scientific and academic communities to remain silent on this if they had opinions or felt that there was something to this phenomena is legend. It goes back to the summer of 1947. And in the past 4 years, we have seen that ridicule factor diminish tremendously, more than in the previous 70 years.
I'm doing my best.
Yes. And you're at Harvard, arguably, the flagship, along with, say, Princeton and Yale, of American, academic elitism and excellence in terms of education. 20 years ago, my late friend and colleague, Dr. John Mack, was censured by Harvard, the first professor to have been censured since the 60s, and Timothy Leary. Unlike Leary, he came back with his attorney, Daniel Sheehan, to establish that there was a basis for him to take seriously accounts of genuine contact and abduction, so to say. and was reinstated in Harvard. It's a very different climate right now, and you're approaching it much more pragmatically. Have you had anybody higher up, in the administration look at you cross-eyed on this, so to say, or it seems to be that it's something that has general support among the faculty and the administration?
Well, first of all, let me explain that I'm very different than Mac, because he was using humans as detectors. In physics, humans cannot be detectors. You cannot write a physics scientific paper saying this person told me that. It doesn't hold water. And the reason is simple. People have hallucinations, they have wishful thinking. You cannot believe people. Look at politics. And therefore, in physics, what matters are measurements by instruments. Okay? And that makes physics very different than human psychology. Okay? So I am very different than John obviously both of us shared the Harvard University, but very different approach to this matter. Now, when I wanted to establish the Galileo project, after a few wealthy individuals visited the porch of my home, and by the way, this
porch is legendary, by the way.
Yeah.
I got to get on this porch.
If you could be a fly on your porch, Avi Loeb, holy cow.
I should tell you, like, for example, a day ago, I had a visit by two people, a married couple that brought me a plant that their daughter sent, and we planted it in the backyard. And they came over because they were very inspired by my book. And I get a lot of interesting visitors, and so anyway, coming back to what I was talking about before, I was funded at an interesting level, a few $1 million, and that allowed me to establish the Galileo project. And then when I contacted the higher administration at Harvard, I was asked before they allowed me to funnel the funds through Harvard. They asked me, "Is this part of your day job?" Okay. And I said, well, if I look back at my career, over the past few decades, all I did was analyze data that was obtained by telescopes and interpret it. And the Galileo project is doing exactly that. We plan to use telescopes, assemble data, and analyze it. Now, in astronomy, there is no lower limit as to how far a source can be to be of interest. We look at meteors, we look at asteroids, comets, at the sun. These are nearby objects, relatively speaking, compared to the size of the universe. And astronomy is more about, figuring out the big picture. And, if we have objects that are near Earth that came from far away, they're part of astronomy. So what I'm doing is astronomy. So after I sent that email, it was approved. The project was approved as being part of my day job. And I don't see any issue with that. I have 4 undergraduates within Harvard that approached me and wanted to work on the project voluntarily. All of the members, including Lou and Chris, approached me. It's not as if I went out and tried to bring in people. And we have more than 100 scientists. And it's quite remarkable because when I wrote my book, I said, if we engage in this subject of checking whether there is equipment from other civilizations near Earth, we will bring more funds to science and we will bring more talent to science. And I was attacked. And I rest my case now because the Galileo project brought funds to science that were not allocated to other projects before. And it brought unusual talent, and the young people are really excited about it. But what bothers me is the toxic atmosphere surrounding this subject, because it does suppress free thought and it does suppress innovation. I'm trying to counteract that as much as I can.
And that is primarily, it sounds like it's primarily not coming from this side of the fence. And when I mean this side, I mean the free thinkers, the people who either believe in the topic or at least want to have somebody look into it more. It seems like that pushback is coming from our scientists, which is wild. And so let me ask you this real quick, because I want to clear this up for some folks here in the UAP community, the UFO community. So what I'm gathering by what you're saying is that just eyewitness testimony alone is not enough, correct? Is that fair to say? Can you sort of elaborate? And is there any sort of advice that you would give to people who have started a belief system based off of just eyewitness testimony or hearsay?
Well, indeed, our eyes are detectors of light.
Right.
And our ears are detectors of sound. But we developed instruments that, like microphones, that are better detectors of sound, and cameras that are better detectors of light. Now, the problem with humans is that all of this information goes into their brain, and then you have to ask whether there is a filter in the brain that is not giving you reliable information afterwards, because people want to believe they saw something that they didn't really see, or you have to worry about it. Whereas in an instrument like a camera or a microphone, you don't have that. It goes straight through. By the way, I see a better future for science, because at some point we will have artificial intelligence systems that you can feed scientific data to, and they will do the scientific work. I call that AI scientists. And the reason I see that as a better practice of science is because they will not have egos. They will not have an agenda to pretend that they are experts, that they know more than they actually know. If they see an object like Oumuamua that looks weird, it doesn't look like a comet or an asteroid, the AI system will say it doesn't look like an asteroid or a comet that we have seen before. And if it sees that it looks like 2020 SO, an object, a rocket booster that we launched in 1966 that was discovered a year ago, then and was pushed away from the sun by reflecting sunlight without a cometary tail, then this AI scientist would say, it looks like a rocket booster to me. And there would not be any ego attached. There would not be any attacks on social media, because it's an AI system. It doesn't care. It will just analyze the data. So I feel that science could advance much more rapidly in the future if AI systems will replace humans as scientists.
Well, speaking a little bit of the sensor arrays that Galileo is looking to implement, we had a question here from our friend Bradley Voorhees, who asks, will the Galileo sensors arrays include spectrometers? I want to know if the light that people see radiating from UAP, I want to know if that light is actually daylight coming through a wormhole.
Okay, so the first is, we have several phases in the instrumentation. The first phase will be, and that's something we are starting to assemble in the coming weeks. The first would be a relatively simple telescope system that will look at the entire sky with optical cameras that basically see reflected sunlight during the day and cannot see anything during the night, obviously. But it will be complemented by an infrared system that will have sensors looking at the entire sky in the infrared, so it could see warm objects at night out to similar distances of several miles, away. So we will look at the sky, take a video of the sky in both optical, visible light, and infrared light, and that already, that gives you information in 2 bands, which can say something about the spectrum of the emission. But of course, if we have enough light, we could use a spectrograph, and we hope to do that to get more information about maybe the composition of the object. And then we will have radio sensors that will try to detect radio waves from such objects, and audio sensors. So altogether, we'll try to collect as much data as possible within the limitation of the budget that we have. And a single system like that may be $100,000 to $200,000, and then we could perhaps construct 5 to 10 such systems with the budget that we have now. The hope is that if we get $100 million, as I hope we will, then we can produce 100 systems or hundreds of systems like that, and then spread them in many locations and get a much better analysis of the sky.
Speaking of $100 million, did you get the chance to speak with Jeff Bezos privately?
Yeah, that's what I was hoping. You were definitely nudging some people in that audience. Hey, by the way, we're looking for funding. I loved it. I think it's great.
I mentioned our needs, but at this point, it didn't lead to any helpful consequences.
Rather, what do you got?
Well, let's say that you are fully funded and that we get all these telescopes out there, and you're sitting there searching for 10 years and you don't find anything. What point can you say that no results equal UAPs aren't real, or how does that conversation go?
Well, that's an excellent question, because you can see the same discussion in the context of dark matter. So 40 years ago we started searching for the nature of dark matter. We know that there is much more stuff out there than ordinary matter that we are made of, at least 5 times more, and we don't know what it is. And 40 years ago, people suggested maybe it's weakly interacting massive particles. So a lot of laboratories built experiments that would search for such particles, and there were some properties of these particles that we searched for and ruled them out. So by now, the original particles that were envisioned could not exist as dark matter. And the limits are way down by orders of magnitude. After 40 years, hundreds of millions of dollars were spent on this. We also looked for signatures in the sky of such particles. We haven't found it. So after 40 years, hundreds of millions of dollars, we are empty-handed. And I asked one of these experimentalists, I said, how long will you continue? Okay, that's your question, right? You keep putting limits, and won't at some point, you have a finite life, so you have to decide strategically whether you continue in the search, even though you push down the limits, or you move on to do something else. And that person said, as long as I'm funded, I will continue. And he's still funded. So it's part of the mainstream. My point is, if we search for equipment from other civilizations near Earth, and we do it for 40 years, and we spend hundreds of millions of dollars, and we don't find anything, then we would be at exactly the same point as the mainstream of dark matter searches is right now. Okay? And if you ask me, I would expect to find something by then.
What do you got, Peter?
Love that answer.
Avi, as you continue to work with your team to develop new funding for these projects, as the project advances, gains more public acceptance, do you personally feel at this point that you're educating yourself on this subject, the data you're collecting, the evidence that you are seeing leads you to conclude, and I'll use the word conclude rather than believe, that some or any truly anomalous UFO phenomena do in fact represent highly advanced technology under intelligent control from parts unknown?
Yeah, what I would say is there is definitely evidence or data that is very intriguing that we should examine more carefully, and it's not conclusive. That's why we are doing the research, because if it was conclusive, there wouldn't be any need for the Galileo project. So that's the way science is done. It's you are advancing your knowledge. Now, what many scientists say is, until we are given extraordinary evidence, we won't even engage in this discussion. And my point is, you would never get that evidence unless you fund the search. That's an obvious, my daughter, she's a teenager, she understands that. Why is it so difficult to understand that it's a circular argument to require? I think it's Carl Sagan that basically said extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. My reply to that is extraordinary conservatism leads to extraordinary ignorance. And the point is, if you don't look through the windows of your home, you can claim that you don't have neighbors because you don't see them. You can sit on the sofa and, just like Enrico Fermi say, where is everybody? You're sitting at home on the sofa. You're not looking through the windows. Where is everybody? Of course. If you didn't open the door, if you didn't look through the windows, you can ask, where is everybody? And everyone would say, I need extraordinary evidence that I have neighbors. I don't see that in my home. Therefore, I will not even look at the window. Now,
they're all on your porch.
My point
they're all on your. All they got to do is go to the porch, Avi.
No, my point is simple. Take a telescope, look through the window, and only then the discussion will be substantive. And the point is, it's not a philosophical discussion. Just like whether the Earth moves around the sun or the sun moves around the Earth is not a philosophical discussion. Now, there were these philosophers saying, we don't want to look through your telescope to Galileo, and they put him in house arrest. Today, they would have canceled him on social media. And the point
you remind me, when you mentioned the Sagan quote, of a wonderful quote from Max Planck, Nobel Award-winning physicist, which was, science advances one funeral at a time.
Yeah, I mean, one way to figure out the truth is, as you get better and better data, if your signal gets weaker and weaker, then you know that it's not real. If it gets stronger and stronger, you know that there is something to it.
Yeah.
And that's why getting more data is important. And the point is that, it's really all about collecting the evidence. And nowadays, when we send out spacecraft, for missions, we do it based on the knowledge that started with Galileo, that the Earth moves around the sun. Nobody remembers those philosophers. At the time, they were more powerful, politically speaking, than Galileo. And poor Galileo was in house arrest because of them. And imagine what he thought. He couldn't communicate with people. They wanted him to stay at home. And nobody remembers those philosophers. I mean, there are some historians of science that remember their names, but the point is they were completely useless to advancing our knowledge because they didn't base it on data. And my point is, if you follow the data, then you have some chance of learning something new.
There's a really fun clip floating around of you on social media of you speaking at a SETI, I guess, discussion with a bunch of SETI scientists. And I can't remember her name, but she basically said she accused you of throwing science under the bus.
Oh.
And I've never seen you this animated ever. So I'm curious to know, because I thought your response was awesome, but I am curious to know what has changed SETI's mind and convinced them this has to do with G. Wes's question here. It was surprising that Seth Shostak got on board with the Galileo project after making light of UAP subject in years past. What changed his mind?
Well, so you have to ask yourself, why was the SETI community negative about this discussion? And my understanding is, that this community didn't get the respect it deserves for decades, okay? And when you don't get the respect you deserve, and in my vocabulary, respect means funding, okay? If you don't get it, you are always very cautious at satisfying the people that do not treat you with respect. So if someone else says, look, you are mistreated, you say, please be quiet, because those people that mistreat me will mistreat me even more if you speak out. And so that is my understanding. And frankly, as I said before, I don't care about it because, I came from different fields, like studying the universe, cosmology, studying black holes. And in those fields, my experience was when something unusual shows up, you talk about possibilities and you talk about them in a courageous way. You just say, this is a possibility, let's collect more data, and you explain to the experimentalists what needs to be done in order to rule in or rule out those hypotheses. That's standard practice in cosmology. A lot of ideas are floated and then you test them. Okay, that's standard practice. Then I come to this field and there is this unusual object, Oumuamua, and I say, let's entertain the possibility. And then people jump at me and attack me personally and say, you're throwing science under the bus. I'm not throwing science under the bus. On the contrary, I'm just putting science in the bus.
I love it.
Buckle up.
I'm saying let's discuss this subject like adults. Let's collect more evidence. Let's treat it with dignity. Let's get it funded 1,000 times more than it is now, so that it, gets the respect it deserves. That's all I'm saying, and I'm being attacked for that. So my point is, just why don't you join forces with me, and let's move it forward. Let's get more funding. Let's get more talent engaged in it, so that we can get to the bottom of it, figure out whether there are objects near Earth that might be of extraterrestrial technological origin. That's all I wanted, and that's all I want right now. Now, the amazing thing is that the tide changed over the past few months, and one of the things that happened was in Washington D.C. the Gillibrand amendment, that shows respect for the Galileo project. I see that as a very positive development, because I think it encourages scientific inquiry into this question. The fact that it recognizes the Galileo project means that the government or the Senate or whoever supports it, whoever thinks that it's a good idea, believes that a team of 100 scientists or more looking into this subject is a good idea.
Yeah.
And by the way, the public thinks it's a good idea. So I now have a lot of support. And I didn't change the tune at all. From day one, I was advocating for that. And of course, it feels like, if you swim in the ocean and there are big waves, sometimes they carry you down and you get hit on the ground, and then they carry you up. I don't care about those things. I'm just trying to swim towards the target, which is shedding light on this, on these objects, trying to figure out their nature, and we can do it. It's not a philosophical discussion. We can use instruments to figure it out, and that's what I'm trying to do.
I think the biggest challenge is it starts from this place, and we know how much negativity there has been in the scientific community and in academia to even look at it, to even hypothesize that these objects could be here already is the real problem, right? Even there's a documentary called Planet B, and it looks like it's going to be a very interesting documentary. And it's a scientific look into exoplanets and Goldilocks planets and habitable zones around the star systems in our galaxy. And even in the trailer for that, every single person's going, we're not looking for little green men. We're not, and it's like, why does that have to be the baseline? Why can't we just have a conversation about an unknown and talk about it like an unknown? And I think that's a lot of people's frustration.
Yeah, I was asked this question by the Norwegian filming crew that came to my porch today. And
this porch, Avi. Oh my goodness, man! Can I please set up a live cam of the porch, kind of like watching an eagle's nest? We'll just have a 24-hour stream of this porch. I think it would be gangbusters.
We could use it to raise money.
Porch. I mean,
we might use it to raise money, Avi. That's a great suggestion.
Okay. At any event, the answer to the question, what sets up this. Sorry, you distracted.
I threw you off.
Way to go, Luis.
The little green men base. The basis of little
like
green men.
The baseline is always somehow either it's scientific or it's little green men, and it can't be anywhere in between. And it's so frustrating.
Look at that.
Right.
Threw off Avi Loeb.
The point is that it's a circular argument, and I think much of the reason that the scientists develop this attitude is because the public is so interested in this question, and scientists, prefer not to engage in something that is of such great interest to the public, because obviously there are lots of falsehoods that are being promoted. At the same time, people make speculations that physics is violated, that all kinds of things, and scientists want to be careful and protect their image and remain experts. But my point is, 1,000 years ago, there were speculations about the human body. A lot of people said it has a soul, therefore we shouldn't have anatomy, operations of the human body. And, some of these ideas were completely wrong. They were saying if we operate the human body, we will hurt the soul of a person. We know that's not true now. I mean, we are actually operating people to help them cure problems they have. And imagine the scientists saying there is a lot of nonsense being said about the human body. We don't want to engage in it. It's controversial, which is pretty much what is being said about the UAP or UFOs. And in that case, modern medicine would not be where it is. So my point is, even if people say nonsense about the subject, that doesn't remove it from the scientific agenda. What should bring it into the scientific agenda is, first of all, that there are some anomalies, that we see things that we don't fully understand. So science is supposed to clear up the fog, clean, give us more information so we can act responsibly. We understand what reality is about. That's the first trigger. For me, that was the trigger. Oumuamua, and then afterwards, the report from ODNI to Congress that triggered the Galileo project. And the second thing is that, if we have the instruments, the scientific capability to address this subject, and the public cares so much about it, we must do it, because knowing reality is always to our benefit. Knowing what the human body is made of internally is to the benefit of medicine. And, if we find out that we are not the smartest kid on the block, that there are things floating around us, that would change the way we think of our future, our aspirations for space. There are questions about what we can learn from them, from a smarter kid on the... There are lots of things, lots of implications. And just ignoring reality and saying there is nothing out there without looking through our windows is a mistake, in my view. As a scientist, I want to understand reality, to the best of my ability. And talking about the multiverse instead, which is something you cannot test experimentally, or talking about extra dimensions that we cannot see, talk about string theory landscape that we cannot see. Things like that are mainstream. Nevertheless, to me, they make less sense than talking about something like us on another planet, simply because, half of the stars like the sun have a planet like the Earth, roughly at the same separation. Many of them existed for billions of years before us, before the sun. And so we just need to check if, someone predated us that was even more advanced than we are. Why is that a problem? Why do we feel as if that offends us to discuss this possibility? Why do we feel that we need extraordinary evidence before we engage in this? We never asked for extraordinary evidence before we engage in the search for weakly interacting massive particles. I mean, of course, in general, we know dark matter perhaps exists. Even that is not clear because maybe gravity is modified. So my point is, science is a learning experience. And the way to learn is to courageously seek evidence, seek data, and learn from that, rather than ridicule the subject, feel that you are smart, and then play with mathematics that has no bearing on experiments, which is pretty much what is done.
Right.
Yep. Peter, you had something to say?
Yeah, just that I think the root of the dissonance in the scientific community and why this is all coming to a fore now and not decades ago is that in 1947, the American people were inundated with exaggerated information in the media that whatever this new phenomena was in the skies, it was not flying saucers and little green men. And the ridicule factor became so deeply entrenched in academia and the world of respected science that none dared violate it for fear of a hit or even destruction of their professional reputations. The last 4 years have been a breath of fresh air. And Avi, you really emblemize that new spirit in the scientific community internationally that is now courageously going after this data. And I think it's a very exciting time for those of us who have been in the work for longer than not to see this change and the ridicule basically evaporating, and people of all areas worthy of respect coming forward to add to this dialogue, and especially in the world of academia where this was a non-existent quotient for so many decades. And thank you for continuing to do the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you. And the reason we are able to do that is partly because of the support from the public. And
Yep.
I'm echoing that support. We wouldn't be able to have the Galileo project without the support. So in a way, I resonate with the public because I don't regard myself as different from the public. I was not groomed at Harvard. I grew up on a farm, and I could have ended on the farm, and I might have been even happier there. I don't see myself as different from anyone else, and that's why I follow my common sense. You see, that's the other thing, that I'm not trying to demonstrate that I'm smart. I don't care if people attack me personally. That's not the issue at all. I'm really trying to figure out what is out there. And that was always my intention as a kid. And I'm still, you can think of me as a farm boy, that has a lifetime of experience, but is refusing to give up on curiosity, on innocence in a way, in favor of boosting my image and getting awards, honors, and recognition from my academic colleagues. That's not really what drives me. And I don't give a damn.
Avi, we've got a few more questions for you. Do you have a couple more minutes to give us?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, thank you. So I did. Let me go ahead and ask this, because this question's been sitting here for a minute. I'm struck by Lieutenant Graves' testifying Navy pilots had daily encounters off of the eastern seaboard. Obviously, Galileo will focus sensors there. You should find UAP right away, no?
If that's true, yes. The point is, we have to be wary of military sites, and because obviously they're of national security importance, and we don't want to violate the law, and so there are sensitive areas that we probably will not be able to position our telescopes in, just because of national security concerns. And that's okay, but if indeed such objects are common, as was reported by Graves, then we should find them. The way I see it is like a low-hanging fruit. So there is this important poem by Robert Frost that talks about taking the path not taken, and that made all the difference for him. Okay. And for me, the advantage of taking the path not taken is because along the way, as you go along this path, you may see low-hanging fruit that nobody picked up. Why? Because nobody took this path. And so the point is, if we take a path that is original, just because it was ridiculed in the past, you have a chance of collecting easily low-hanging fruit.
I love it. Gentlemen, do you have any other questions for Avi?
Sorry, go ahead, brother.
Well, yeah, there's another really interesting scientific endeavor going on, which is the James Webb Space Telescope. And I'm curious to your thoughts on if you think that's going to detect biosignatures out there, and if so, what would that mean for the Galileo project and the support of these endeavors?
So my first area of focus in astrophysics was the first stars and the first galaxies. It's sort of the scientific version of the story of Genesis, how the first light was produced. And I actually wrote 2 textbooks on this subject, and I helped pioneer this subject. And I was in the first advisory committee that designed the James Webb Space Telescope.
Wow.
Back then it was called the Next Generation Space Telescope. And we were aiming at building a telescope that will see the light from the first stars, the first galaxies. That was the main purpose. But of course, once you have an infrared telescope of this size, you can use it for a different purpose. And since then, there were exoplanets discovered, and one can look for example, I wrote a paper a few years ago that you can look for example, for biomarkers for molecules like oxygen in a planet near that goes around another star nearby, and in principle perhaps say something about whether there is primitive life there. But That is very challenging with the James Webb Space Telescope. We really need the next generation of telescopes, which the astronomy community is advocating for in the latest decadal survey. But my point is, whenever we are looking for oxygen or methane, we should also look for industrial pollution, because oxygen did not exist for the first 2 billion years on Earth, even though there were microbes. So there was life on Earth for 2 billion, for half of the age of the Earth, there was life without much oxygen in the atmosphere. So if we don't find oxygen, doesn't mean that there is no life on a planet. And if we do find, you can make it in other ways, so it will not be conclusive. But if you find CFCs, these are the molecules produced by refrigerating systems, by industries, then you know that not only there is life, but there is industrial life, and they are polluting their atmosphere like crazy. And why not use the same spectrograph to look for both? You don't hear that very often. I wrote a paper in 2015 suggesting that, and I do think that we should search for industrial pollution as well.
What do you got, Mike?
Makes sense.
I was just going to say, you had the opportunity, obviously, to speak closely with Bill Nelson. Did you guys have an opportunity to speak at all off camera? And if you were interested in any way with working with NASA in relationship to the Galileo project?
Well, unfortunately, Bill Nelson had to attend the launch on the day of the event in Washington. He was supposed to be there, but then the launch was supposed to be a day later. But then because it was advanced, he missed the event, but he was recorded on video. And then since early June, I heard him speak quite clearly on CNN saying that he saw some of the classified information as a senator on UAP. That was a few weeks before the ODNI report was delivered to Congress, and he said that scientists should look into that. And shortly after hearing that, I approached some people in NASA and said, I'll be happy to help you make your boss happy. And it didn't materialize, but I'm always willing to engage in collaboration with NASA, because I think NASA, part of its mission is to search for life in the universe, and of course they are engaged in the search for primitive life, but the search for intelligent life should get a higher priority, and including trying to figure out the nature of UAP. And I would be very happy, of course, to speak with Bill Nelson about it. I think we resonate on this subject, and I will be happy to collaborate in obtaining open data on this subject, because I very much agree with his sentiment that scientists should look into it. So I think we are fully in agreement. If we were to meet, we wouldn't have to say much to each other, because we pretty much agree on everything.
I love it. Peter, did you have any last questions for Avi?
Just that I hope somewhere down the road, and right now I know you have your hands more than full with your colleagues, there is a whole nother area of study. And part of it revolves around, I will say, witness testimony, but as close to unimpeachable as it can be. Best example I can give you is on October 19th, there was a press conference at the National Press Club involving 4 former United States Air Force officers, all of whom in the 60s and 70s had been involved as nuclear missile launch officers to one degree or another, who had UFOs come in over their bases, and while they watched, their missiles all shut down. We have a history of this going back decades, also the Soviet Union.
One of them, a research affiliate of the Galileo project, Bob Salas. He became a research fellow affiliate of the Galileo project just yesterday, and he was in the meeting today.
Great. That's wonderful to hear. You've answered my question.
Awesome.
Oh, okay. That was your question.
Yeah, that's great. We had Bob on the show.
Anthony wanted to hear too.
Yeah. So that we had a question from the audience, and he asks, thank you so much for the donation. Avi, will there be anything in the Galileo project that allows us, the average Joe, to contribute?
Well, there might be. For example, if we develop small telescope systems that are relatively cheap and we want to distribute them in many locations, there might be some way for private citizens to contribute their porch or a place for us to put the telescope in. And but we are not there yet. And there might be also an opportunity to analyze data because it will be open, so we can ask people to dive into the data and look for things that we may have missed, things like that. We are not there yet, but within a year or two, maybe there will be opportunities of this type. And for now, what we need is to get funded at a level that would allow us to move forward. And also, of course, get support. And I think in terms of support from the public, we couldn't have imagined something better than we already have. And also support from Washington. I find that remarkable. I'm hopeful that eventually it will become mainstream also in academia. And there will be a department in each university on this subject.
Can I ask you, because I thought of the idea before Michael said it, I swear to God, Michael, but when you had first mentioned, right when you came on the show that you had just gotten off a telephone, I'm assuming what would be a telephone call or a conference call. Am I correct? Or was this sort of like a Zoom meeting?
No, it's a Zoom meeting. That's the way we handle our team meetings. So we haven't yet, most of the members of the Galileo team haven't met in person, but we do hope to do so later in 2022 to meet in person. But nowadays, Zoom allows us to basically operate very efficiently, very effectively.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I asked that question is because, and I'm serious when I say this, if those conversations, in your opinion, are okay to listen to publicly, I don't know why you guys aren't streaming those conversations and trying to raise money for the project at the same time. I know that it might sound silly, but I think it's a great opportunity to not only let the public sort of see how you guys are working and how the scientific process is being discussed by scientists, but it also allows an opportunity to be like, hey, I like what these guys are doing. Let me throw them a couple bucks.
Right. No, so we are developing outreach materials and eventually we'll distribute them. But you have to understand the way that the scientific work is done is you have to be careful not to confuse people from outside, in the sense of, there is a procedure. You build the experiment, you then collect the data, then you make sure that everything works okay, and then you release it. But if you were to allow everything to be transparent, then it will be confusing to people that are not experts. And that's what we are trying to avoid. And also in this context that we are dealing with, you don't want hackers to intervene. So that's part of it.
Good point.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, I'm going to leave the floor for anyone here to ask a question, or if Avi, you have a question for us. If not, we're going to let you go for the rest of the afternoon because we know you're a busy man. Gentlemen, anything else?
I just thank you very much for your time, your words, you're fighting the good fight, and for being here with us.
Well,
thank you, Avi.
All I can say is that we will do our best to justify your trust of everyone here and everyone else elsewhere. And we're really serious and honest about it. So what you see is what you will get.
Well, I appreciate it. And please, if we can, at some point, I would love to get you here for 2 hours, a full 2-hour show, so we could open the audience up to questions for you. I think they'd get a real kick out of that, and it'd be a lot of fun. But I know you've got a busy schedule, so we're not going to ask you right here on the spot. But I truly appreciate everything you're doing. I love your gumption. I think like Peter said, you're fighting the good fight, and you're bringing a lot of level-headed discussion to this. And I think it's because of things like the Galileo project, because of Christopher Mellon, because of Lou Elizondo, because of the people in this community interacting with their local state representatives, that we're actually having a moment here. We're having we're seeing this discussion change in real time. And I'm excited for the future. And I'm by looking at your face, I could also tell you are as well.
Well, just keep in mind, it's not about the discussion. It's about what we will find. So, the fishermen can talk for as long as they want, but if they don't get any fish in their fishing net, that's not worth much. So just wait until we bring you some fish.
I
Can't wait.
When you do, we'll get on this patio of yours and I'll grill them up, buddy. Sir Avi
Great.
Loeb, thank you so much. We'll see you soon, my friend, and Godspeed.
Thank you, Avi.
Thanks, Avi.
Bye-bye.
Man,
It's always fantastic. Yeah, he's
always
just an amazing guy.
fantastic. Always fantastic. So my first question for the group here, because I know the two of you guys, and when I say two of you guys, Michael and Rather, were nervous, had hesitation and reservations about Lou Elizondo and Christopher Mellon joining the Galileo project. So based off of his answers,
All right, we're just backing the bus up. Let's go.
Let's do it. I want to know your initial thoughts. Like, that was a huge concern for you guys.
It was.
I was like, I think this is great. I think
Yes,
you can
you
point in the
were.
right direction. If you could get a little more data that helps you collect the actual data you're looking for, in a way, Rather was sort of arguing that would pollute the process, that would pollute the actual science of it.
Let's do a quick plug on that because 2 weeks ago we had an after party in the Discord and we had this whole conversation. So for all of you who are here, you can click on the link below in the link tree and join the Discord because these gentlemen are going to be in the Discord after this to talk to you all. And if you want to be engaged in a conversation with these folks, and we're going to continue to bring more content into the Discord for you guys so you can get more engaged and be with us when we're not on YouTube. I just want to make sure people do that. I actually won't be able to do that today because I'm going to be on the Calling All Beings podcast after this. But I know you guys are going to be in the Discord with Matthew Riot and Meat Cutter and all of these guys, which is going to be awesome. So I just wanted to say that real quickly. Now, getting back to the bus, let's back it up. So yes, absolutely. That was one of my biggest concerns. When I first heard it, my stomach kind of dropped. My biggest fear was what I asked Avi directly here a few minutes ago was, is this two things? Number one, is this going to potentially put us in a position where we are given information or data that could potentially be taken back from Avi in that he wouldn't be able to disclose information in a way that he wanted to scientifically because now the government was involved and they would have some sort of jurisdiction if anything was found. That was my biggest concern. And Avi said absolutely not just now. So, I mean, absolutely not. I mean, I have to take him at his word for that, right? That's what he believes that, that's not going to. Now, hopefully they've got some sort of contracts or something when it comes to advisory roles. I don't know. That might be something to ask Avi next time. But I mean, my biggest concerns have always been, we know that Lou Elizondo, he has a current contract with the government. Could that create any sort of roadblock when it comes to the separation of church and state, if you will, right? Of Harvard and the government. And I think that was my biggest concern. I feel much better after having talked to Avi about it. So yeah, that's where I was coming from.
What about you, Rather?
Yeah, I mean, I still feel like there's a little bit of a possibility of them influencing where we're looking for data, and that kind of tying into a test by the government trying to see if these Harvard scientists can tell the difference between something man-made and something not. Avi's answer of scientists are smart is a pretty good answer. I don't think that they'll fool him, but I'm not going to totally close that door. I still think that there is a possibility. But I guess if that is the case, it'd be good to have the Galileo project trying to get to that answer for us. So I'm not concerned, really.
Well, I thought the one thing that kind of I was like, I don't really love that is if when he said if we get a picture of this thing and we zoom in and we see nuts and bolts and we see something that says made on planet Nibiru or whatever, I don't think you're going to find that on this phenomenon. I don't think that's part of the equation. I could be wrong. I mean, I know when I had my experience, it seemed to me it was very nuts and bolty. It had angles. There was lines that you could distinctly see in the craft. So maybe I'm wrong on that, but I definitely don't remember any welds or rivets on that craft. So that's the thing where I was like,
Avi likes to joke, and I'm certain he was speaking metaphorically
Maybe.
in that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's where he was coming from on that. But you bring up a good point. It's like, are we ever going to capture something like that? And I would have to imagine that. I mean, your experience, you said that the UFO that you saw did have lines and angles, and I've heard this from other folks as well, and I'm sure Peter could just go on a list for days about descriptions that he's received. I've always thought about these things as like, how on earth would you get something with nuts and bolts, across the galaxy? To me, like, you need some sort of extraordinary material that's, that there are no seams and there are no bolts. But that's just me speculating. I have no idea.
What do you say?
Of course, I could, quote you case after case of descriptions. I would say at this point, I feel there is compelling evidence, although, once again, nothing I could present in court or here, that some of these advanced pieces of technology have come down, that they have been retrieved, and that we do have them. However, they are so highly classified that good luck finding the carburetor and presenting it to Congress. That aside, in my childhood sighting with my sister, which was so overwhelming to me that I literally had to repress it. It was a memory that stayed suppressed, with the exception of one brief afternoon, for over 14 years. But when we talked about it, finally, we both remembered very clearly 5 absolutely identical objects, close enough that we could make out around the edge of each regular dotting that we could only read the same way that you would read as windows on an airliner at an appreciable distance. That aside, that point when a camera, a sensor is aimed at a location where something truly structured comes into view, probably rather than being the evidence that will break the camel's back, it will be yet one more contested possibility. And the old argument of, is it Russian, is it Chinese, is it a classified thing of ours? And it will be once again kind of drawn back into the surf to be churned up and pushed back. So every breakthrough that the scientific community is able to establish in terms of developing more and more credible evidence will be argued about, will be contested, and maybe at a certain point we'll have a critical mass of evidence that can no longer be denied, or they will be tired of playing this game, some group of them, and will make themselves known in no uncertain terms, rather than here and there and everywhere, a few at a time over the millennia.
Well, we had, by the way, just speaking to the almost 300 folks out there that are listening, thank you so much for tuning in. If this is your first time here, please do us a favor, like, subscribe, and share the channel. We're almost to 5,000 subscribers, so if you can help us get there, that would be great. Thank you so much. Well, I mean, this is your first time talking to Avi, correct, Peter?
Yes, it is.
So what were your takeaways from the conversation? What are some things that give you hope as someone who's been in this conversation? Again, we stand on your shoulders as far as your research is concerned. We're here because of your work and your tenacity, because you could have given up on this a long time ago. And I do love how you brought in, I do love how you brought in that these last 4 to 5 years have just been a breath of fresh air. So can you sort of talk to that a little bit?
Well, although I haven't spoken with him, I have watched him quite a number of times now on formats very much like this, or, talks on YouTube. Number one, he is an educator. He is brilliant as a communicator. He knows his material back and forth. He can do something that unfortunately is more and more becoming a lost art in our culture, which is the ability to debate as well as carry on a point-by-point conversation. Sadly, and I mean this very seriously, more and more, this is getting eaten away by good minds who spend most of their lives staring into their hand at a handheld communications object and have gained the ability to move their thumbs at an extremely high rate of speed, which I'm sure is going to change the evolutionary pattern in a few generations, with larger and quicker thumbs and smaller cognitive abilities to use your voice and language to actually listen to what's being said rather than waiting for the other person to stop talking so that you can say what you want to get out, because that's more important. One of the things that impressed me in this conversation, because there are three of us kind of going at him, is I could see him as a chess player, with a line of tables with 20 competitors behind him, just walking back and forth, moving the piece, keeping 20 games separate in his mind. Like all great educators, the ability to instill knowledge and inspire people to build on it and want to follow in that that mold is that you also know how to walk that line between giving information, but giving it in a way that is, and I use the word in the most respectful manner, entertaining. He is a live wire. And again, his classical scientific thinking is going to go on, I think, and other colleagues like him, to inspire more and more younger people to get into the world of science. It's now cool again, where
I have a question for you, Peter.
Around this subject, it was something just to keep quiet about if you wanted to keep your reputation intact. And I can't stress strongly enough, because I've spent so much time studying the origins of UFO ridicule, and ridicule as it functions in the governmental community, the intelligence community, the military community, legal, scientific, and academic, where you just dare not say that you take the subject seriously. And there is a tremendous freeing up now over the past few years. And Avi kind of emblemizes it to me. I think he's a great guy, a great man, and a real asset to all of us moving forward, wanting to educate ourselves more and elevating the dialogue.
Let me ask you a quick question, Peter. And this is not aimed at Avi, but obviously sometimes the ends justify the means, or so people rationalize. And so obviously when looking to attract kids to science, one might want to talk about something exciting like UFOs. Do you think there's an inherent potential for those wires to get crossed when somebody is justifying the means in such a way?
It's a great question, Michael. Absolutely. I think first, your personal ethics and the level that you hold yourself to in terms of absolute objective information quality, setting aside your own ego. I'm sure a lot of people look at Avi now and the first thing they see is, oh, well, you're famous. You're on TV, you're on talk shows, your books are selling, you step out of a car and people know who you are. You're a college teacher, for God's sake. And they see that as his motivation.
Right.
It's not. It's a curious byproduct in our celebrity-driven culture of, gosh, you're well known. I wish I was well known because you must live an exciting life. And, I go to the office or the factory or I stay home and I dream of my fantasy picture of what you're about. That is not what drives people at that level of the game. Well, most people. But there is, of course, that wild card of people who are in it for the ego gratification. For me, ufology, the women and the money, of course, is always the driving force. So, I'm guilty as charged.
You're muted, Luis, just so you know.
I was saying I'm shaking off the women and money with a stick. It's coming at me so fast.
I'll be institutionalized very soon.
What do you got, Ryder?
Hey, Peter, you wrote a really excellent paper in 2011, Politics, Religion, and Human Nature, the Practical Problems and Roadblocks on the Path Towards Official UFO Acknowledgement. And in that, you cited a lot about the stigma in the public, and specifically the scientific stigma, and how if you don't look for evidence, you're not going to find any. Do you feel like we're in a fundamentally different place now than we were back there in 2011? And is there more work to do in those kind of regards?
It's funny that you mentioned that. Before I sent that paper to you and Luis, I reread it. I hadn't in several years. It's the kind of research that I really like to do. It's self-starter stuff. You go through, out of print memoirs and newspaper articles and interviews and look into the congressional record, et cetera. And you pull it together, you triangulate, and you present information that's out there, but in an ordered way. And when I reread it, I thought, boy, that's 10 years ago. And that very last part of the paper dealing with the presidency and UFOs, I now consider very outdated in terms of any president's ability to act on this independently. I do say, you really would have to coordinate this with all world leaders, with leaders in the communities of everything as dissonant from psychology to economics to military to religious leaders, in order to do it in a way that mattered. And I can only say that that level of ridicule, which is what a good deal of the paper is about in terms of presenting well-known, respected American political figures, many of whom took this subject very seriously, many of them, a number of them presidential contenders who had the ethics, who had the personal courage to lay it on the line, and whom ultimately all backed off because the ridicule that they were facing was so potentially destructive, it simply could have blown them out of the box and taken away their careers. That is effectively not just on the way out now, but we are living in the beginning of an entirely new era. I have to say on that, rather, that when the articles credited with beginning to turn this around, the ones by Ralph Blumenthal, Leslie Kean, and Kathleen, another wonderful Times staff reporter, came out in December of 2017. Knowing Ralph, knowing Leslie, having followed their work in this field for some years, I thought, great pieces. It's just a matter of time that it all goes back to, nothing to see here, folks, move along. And I waited for about a year, effectively, for the other allegorical shoe to drop. I did not believe that it was a tipping point. And then I realized that it had been, and that the climate was genuinely changing. A podcast or a radio show, the kind of format we're doing right now, 4 short years ago, 5 years ago, would have had a very different tenor and tone. We would be seen by some as, well, outsiders, borderline conspiracists, theorizers, believers, as opposed to having a lively, compelling, serious dialogue about something that is really happening right now and gaining more and more popular interest, as well as interest in the international academic community, political community, scientific community, than frankly I would have ever imagined a few short years ago.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this Gillibrand amendment, the thing that I found most exciting
There you
about
go.
when this Gillibrand amendment was released was, first, it just had her name on it. And then you got the social response to that amendment, which was, I think, for the most part, really positive. And then you saw 2 more senators attach their name to this bill, going, I want some of this popularity shtick. And then we see in the Political article written by Brian Bender about how her kids were like, hey, Mom, well, you going to get us some answers on these UFOs? Like, what's going on? And she's like, I'm trying, I think now, politically speaking, this is no longer suicide. This is something that is actually going to help you politically, not hurt you. And I think they saw that here in the last week. And because the hashtag Gillibrand amendment is trending on Twitter right now.
I have to say
this is becoming popular news.
That caught me completely off guard. Kristen Gillibrand is one of my senators, and to the best of my knowledge, previous to this, she had no real abiding interest in the subject. And I mean, this amendment is over, it's at like 140 pages long, and it is written with knowledge that would not have been at hand in a casual way. She had advisors and probably people at a certain level of the game, how can I say?
Christopher Mellon. First of all.
Maybe, but maybe not. Assisting her not just in organizing the material, but in presenting to her evidences or exhibits, so to say, that allowed her to understand that this was not only serious, this was important, and that, yes, politicians do things to advance their own political careers. What else is new? But that can also superimpose itself on doing that and knowing that it's the right thing to do and the important thing to do. So for whatever number of forces came together to put that in her hands and manifest itself in this extraordinary read. I haven't read the whole thing, but I'm well into it. And this is serious stuff, and the most detailed analysis of its kind I've ever seen come across, a congressman's desk.
Agreed. Rather, did you have any thoughts?
I totally agree.
Yeah. No, I think we're entering a new moment in history here. You had said earlier that I've echoed this in a different sense, that Americans have lost the art of talking about politics. It used to be, when this country, especially when it was founded, the idea of sitting around the dinner table and talking politics was normal.
Yes,
because it directly affected you in a lot more tangible way than it does today.
I was lucky enough to grow up like that.
Yeah. But now the conversation has switched to no politics at the dinner table. Don't do it. Don't bring it here, because it goes to that place of, I'm going to finish what you're saying and then I'm going to get my idea out because I'm right. And it's like, no, that's not.
Wait a second. Yeah. You're saying, okay, so my family has always had conversations about politics, and we have conversations about politics with our kids. But don't you think back in the, like, I've had this conversation with my great grandmother-in-law before she passed away, and she said that they couldn't, like, there were two families, they couldn't talk about politics between, the cousins in this group. So do you think it's changed that much? I mean, politics has always been a volatile conversation, and it's been, and of
so
course, I don't know that
family.
It depends on the family, but
it depends on the family, obviously.
And I'm also thinking of like 1776 era. Before television, before even really newspapers were a normal thing.
People had literal duels, and shot each other.
Literal duels.
I don't know. I agree with you. There were literal duels, but I'm pretty sure, like, having a political conversation at the dinner table at that time period was a little more normal. It was more normalized. I'm sure there was disagreements, and probably 9 times out of 10, the man of the house is the person who had the final say, but I think today that's gone. Like, that idea, I think, is just completely out the window. I think it divulges more into arguments than it does into actual substantive debate. But that's just my feeling. I don't have any data to back that up, but I see what you're saying, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, people want to kill each other with politics. They always have.
Let's bring back duels. Shall
Very good, Michael.
So Peter,
but no, I think an interesting part of your point maybe is that we talk about, it's in our faces more, and we get more emotional in any given moment because we're always connected to it, because it's always in our hand.
How many arguments are going to happen tonight around the dinner table or family gathering or friends even around this Kyle Rittenhouse? I don't want to call it.
Have you checked Twitter today?
It's on fire. Like, it's on fire.
I feel it kind of, boils down to, in politics, people are very sure, they know what they believe, right? And there's no way they're going to be convinced otherwise. And it kind of, translates into the UFO community a little bit too, where you have the debunkers, as you call it, who are absolutely convinced that UFOs aren't real. And then you have, experiencers who've had legitimate experiences, and they're convinced that things are real. And I feel like when those two groups of people talk to each other, you get the same kind of animosity, and like it's very hard to kind of reconcile those, when people know two different things and they can't
Try being
You know-
agnostic in the middle of all that.
Right, right.
Well, rather, it's a very important point. And one of the things I think that we can posit with somebody like Avi is data speaks. And if your data has led you to a certain point of view and opinion, and other data comes in to not only challenge it, but to challenge it to the point where you are compelled to change your point of view, then,
or get angry.
Yeah. Well, but here's
or kill the
issue.
person who made that point.
Data.
Right.
Well,
Off with
here's
his
the thing,
head.
though. Here's the thing, though, Peter, is that in this day and age, I feel like the problem is that you do get the facts, right? And then more data comes out that objects those facts, but that data is not coming from an actual scientific place. Like
That's
and I don't want to get political, but like with COVID, it's like you've got doctors, people who are working in labs, people are telling you, hey, this is dangerous.
Yes.
Please get the shot because it helps us suppress this, just like
Yes.
it does with measles, just like it does with the flu, just like it does with any airborne virus. And then all of a sudden we're in this information age where there's so much information, there's so much influence that if one person says one thing that really doesn't know because they haven't put on the lab coat, they don't have the degree, and they're not doing the actual science of that topic, and they say something, and now you've got a massive people that have been convinced at the snap of a finger that, oh, this is all BS. I shouldn't have to do any of this stuff. Like, they're lying to us. It's this, it's that. And it's like, I've got the proof. I've got the data. Look at it. And
Well,
it's like,
you've got a documentary, and that's the thing. That's why I'm always suspect of documentaries, because they are masters of manipulating people's emotions. Like I do love documentaries, but I always go in with a grain of salt, because you can change. I can't remember who said it. It might have been somebody from Monty Python, but anyway, there's a quote about how you can turn a comedy into a tragedy by simply changing the music. And I think that's so powerful, because you watch a documentary and you can manipulate people's emotions so easily.
Sure. The problem is, I think, in part that in our day and age, especially over the last half dozen years or so, in the American political climate, almost anything can be politicized. And right now, relative to COVID, naysayers or anti-maskers or anti-vaxxers, and who knows, maybe history will prove them right. They're saying, you're taking away my free will and my right, and I think it's the beginning of, or the continuation of controlling society, and I am going to resist it. Even if history proves right that, yes, these vaccines are helping us stem the tide, and they are potentially able to stop this pandemic in its tracks, that I'd rather die and stand up for what I believe in terms of the politics that I think it represents. The same thing can be said of the way that the UFO question has been approached over the past 75 years. It was politicized from day one, in a manner of speaking, to say that, again, I don't know if I made this point when I was on the show, but it's so counterintuitive. The whole debate revolves around, in its essence, I saw something in the sky, or some things in the sky, that because of their size, maneuvering, absolute unconventionality, were unlike anything I have ever seen before, and I wonder what they were. In an otherwise sane and rational world, if I said that to the three of you, you might respond or think, gee, that's interesting. I wonder what they were too. How did it come to pass? Because it makes no logical sense that up until a few years ago, the basic reaction on the part of the great majority of the Western world was, what's wrong with Peter? Is he a hoaxer? Has he become a mystic? Is he seeing this as a road to fame or fortune? Or is he completely mentally ill? Or has he become a member of a cult? Wilhelm Reich had a wonderful phrase called evasion of the obvious. Yes, it just might be highly advanced technology from parts unknown under intelligent control. But from the get-go, we were deeply conditioned by the end of the summer of 1947 to absolutely understand that was shorthand for little green men and flying saucers. And that way will ostracize you. You will receive ridicule. You will damage your career. You will look like a silly person in your community. So don't buck the system. And that's politicization. Right now, again, we are in the first few years of a new chapter in the way that the world is beginning to look at this. And at a certain point, through whatever happens, we hopefully will hit a critical mass. I'll share one thought before I shut up. The second
Why
or
would you
third,
say that?
The runway is yours.
We are entrenched in what you're saying. Please.
And turn the floor back to you three gentlemen. The second or third day that I had self-isolated, which was on, I think, March 18th of last year, I'm sitting in my home and I'm thinking about the pandemic. My sister is a registered nurse practitioner, talked to me a few days before, being involved in conference after conference for weeks with regional, state, federal agencies in terms of what may be coming at us. She talked to me not about it, but she talked to me about the potential of what it might be over the next 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. I remember getting off that phone call very shaken. And I'm sitting at home thinking, gee, I'm thinking about the pandemic. Wait a minute. I've thought for years about this thing called disclosure, even before it became a term 20 odd years ago. And one of the hallmarks of disclosure will be, on a human level, that we will all be in a climate where you can be sitting at home thinking about, oh my God, we're not alone, knowing pretty well that the huge majority of everybody else on the planet at that same moment will be thinking, oh my God, we're not alone. A very unifying moment in humanity. And that I felt that moment, again, about the 18th or so of March last year, that there was a parallel there to us knowing in no uncertain terms, established scientifically by people like Avi and his team, by credible witnesses like Robert Salas, military personnel involved in undeniable events and of character with nothing to gain. And we're in the process right now. And again, it makes it a very exciting time to be doing this work and being involved in a dialogue like this. Anyway, that's my 2 cents for the moment, and I'm sticking to it.
I like your 2 cents, and I'll rub those 2 pennies together and say thank you. I know this is probably going to really enrage Joe Murgia, but thank you, NeuroStream, for the $100 donation. I truly appreciate it. Love the back and forth on these exchanges of ideas. This is how we find truth in understanding each other more. I truly, truly appreciate the support and everybody. And guys, the super chats out there that I wasn't able to read that weren't questions, I just wanted to let those go, put them up on the screen so we recognize them, but I didn't want to stop the flow of the show just to read those. So I hope you understand, but I truly appreciate all of the support you guys send our way. Okay, so
I just want to speak to. Can I quickly speak to NeuroStream here and what we were talking about earlier, like in regards to the pandemic and then in relationship to the UFO community? I think it's always a challenge, right? Because, and I think this is one of the reasons why we talk about cognitive bias and logical fallacy a lot, is because it's so easy for us to come to a conclusion that we believe is true to get us through the day, right? And so, you think about the folks who, like, for example, in the pandemic, who were saying, I'm going to stand up to a totalitarian government. That's their perspective on it, right? That's their belief system. And so I think what's dangerous is we automatically mock those people and we automatically come at them in such a way that when we start talking to them like dummies, and I think this is where you start to see the breakdown and the polarization of society. And even though I'm somebody who very much strongly believes in modern medicine, I do think you need to be able to listen to people and question where you're coming from in such a way that allows you to give them the space chance to speak their piece, and then you can have a conversation, and you can be rational and logical. But I think as long as we're coming at each other from these emotionally polarized viewpoints, it's going to be very difficult to do that. And it's the same thing for UFO Twitter. Sorry, go ahead, Peter.
Well, exactly. Well, that's why my advice to everybody is take the topic seriously, just don't take yourself too seriously.
Right.
And that's what I mean by when I say that. I don't mean you can't be serious about this when you discuss it. You can have those moments. But at the end of this, like, if you're losing your job, you're losing your pension, you're losing the way of life that you live, you're doing this wrong. Like, you're doing it wrong, period, full stop. And so, this idea, and that's why I asked Avi, like, his opinion about eyewitness testimony and how it's part of the equation, but it's not the whole thing. And we can't just rely on that. I'm sorry, we can't. This is a new day and age where this is a fresh of breath air. We're doing this differently, whether you old garb want to do it or not. The high lords of this UFO topic don't want to go there. I'm sorry, you've lost control. Your dates are done. Like, this is no longer going in that realm. But Peter, real quick, last thoughts, and we'll get you out of here.
Michael and Louis, you make a great point. Over the past 40 odd years, I have found my mind changing, my opinion being revised, my thoughts on the phenomena branching out. There has to be a certain humility in continuing in this work. And if you attach yourself too tightly to a point of view, a belief, a philosophy about it, you've basically canceled your own ticket. We all need to maintain the ability to keep our minds open and allow them to change as we evaluate incoming data.
Can I get a hallelujah?
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Well, Mr. Peter Robbins, I can't thank you enough for sharing your time with Avi Loeb. We're going to get you back for a full 2-hour episode. I swear to God.
Done this to him twice now.
Twice. The second time, yeah, right? But you're such a wonderful soul. And, man, I am so happy that Ryan Sprague, and he's here, by the way. I hope these gents can make a living doing this. They deserve it more than most people, including those who criticize them for doing so. I am so happy that I've made friends with Ryan Sprague, and Ryan has introduced us to you, because, man, I love having you here. I think you're such a wonderful, just calm presence when we talk about
mind.
Breath of fresh air.
Yeah, a breath of fresh air. Someone who I'd love to sit on a porch with.
Avi Loeb's porch, as a matter of fact.
Some sweet tea in a rocking chair.
Firing our weapons off into the distance.
Exactly. So with all of that said, Mr. Peter Robbins, we appreciate you being here. Look forward to having you again, and we'll talk to you soon, my good man.
Okay, be well, guys. A pleasure being with you.
Did we tell where people can find Peter? Did we?
Yes, please, Peter. Tell everybody where you can find your work. I'm sorry.
Tune me in on KGRA on Meanwhile Here on Earth, Monday nights, 7 to 9 Eastern Standard Time. Follow me on Twitter or meet me on Facebook.
And what a radio voice he has.
Fix the landing on that part. All right, my friend. We'll see you soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks.
Luis, I'm gonna do I'm gonna start cutting into your super chats. I'm gonna do a little dollar jar every time you say full stop. I get $1. How's that go?
That's fine. Maybe we'll make a t-shirt that says full stop. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. That was a really, really fun show. Before we get out of here, of course, we've got some bills to pay, but Michael, what's going on? Well, you don't have a show on Singularity Lab next week, right?
No Singularity Lab show next week. It will be Thanksgiving, so I'm very happy to enjoy it with my family, and I expect all of you to do the same as much as you can.
There you go. Rather, anything you're working on before we get out of here?
Trying to find another rabbit hole to dig into, and find me over at Rather Be Squidding on YouTube.
You can also find him on Twitter on Discord if you have ideas to we've got an entire channel about his channel. So if you have some rather be good at ideas, please share them there.
Yeah, join the conversation.
Apparently he's running for Congress, but that's a discussion for the Discord. Speaking of, join us in the Discord after the show. I'll be there in a few minutes after I start uploading the podcast. Link is in the description below. We've got the podcast that's available shortly after the show. Speaking of, it's available on iTunes, Spotify, also on KGRDB. So check that out as well. Patreon, Super Chats, thank you all so much for supporting the show. We are a public access channel, so every dollar counts to making sure that we can provide this show for you 5 days a week. Like, share, subscribe. We're so close to 5K. Help us get there if we can before the end of the month. That'd be fun. If not, that's okay. We'll get there eventually. Again, everybody's links who was here in the show are down below. So go down there, support them however you can. Until next time, you guys, we really appreciate you being here, coming aboard, getting weird with us here on another episode of the Unidentified Celebrity Review, your home for credible news, reviews, and commentary on everything UAP and UFO. I'm Luis Jimenez, Michael Mataluni, rather be squidding. Until next time, you guys, peace. Also, real quick, I know we're no longer live on KGRA, but I just wanted to read the poll because it was a really fun poll. So it says the poll was TGIF, and the options were: is that a new type of GIF with 15% of the vote? I work on the weekends with 16% of the vote. I love that 90s programming block with 31% of the vote, and I'm already drunk one with 38% of the vote. So TGIF to you guys out there. Enjoy the weekend. We'll see you soon.
Oh, wait.
Nothing but love. Yeah. What?
Real quick, I was just going to say also, so again, cocktails on Discord with these guys, and then join me over at Calling All Beings. I'll be taking my time off and having a cocktail there.
Excellent. All right, my man. Well, we'll see you there. Peace.